Bugatti didn't think that we were going to be able to separate this car in half.
Can't do that in a garage. There's just a few places in the world with the right equipment to be able to do that.
And put it back together.
We're looking good, we're looking good.
But we managed to do both of them, and on top of that, we managed to get it even started.
What happens when one mechanic decides to challenge Bugatti itself? It all starts with a crashed Chiron Pur Sport, a repair estimate north of $1 million, and a factory that refused to sell a single replacement part. But instead of giving up, Matt Armstrong took on the impossible. His mission quickly became much bigger than fixing one hypercar. It ignited a worldwide debate about ownership, manufacturer control, and the right to repair. Was Bugatti protecting lives or protecting its business? And does Europe's brand new repair law finally put manufacturers on notice? We're breaking down every single twist in this story. The Bugatti that started a war. In October of 2025, a Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport.
Bugatti Chiron Pur Sport, and it is the ultimate version of one of the ultimate cars.
One of only 60 ever built, was involved in a serious crash while being driven hard on a stunt run. The car belonged to content creator Alex Gonzalez, and after the impact, the damage was severe enough that the front end had absorbed deployed airbags, cracked carbon fiber, and a twisted subframe. Bugatti flew a technician in from France to inspect it in person. The verdict came back quickly: total loss. The car received a salvage title and was listed for auction. Gonzalez was offered a factory repair through Bugatti directly, priced at roughly $1,700,000, nearly half of what the car had originally cost. He declined. What happened next is the part of this story that turned a single insurance claim into a public standoff. Bugatti did not simply decline to perform the repair themselves. According to multiple independent reports on the case, the manufacturer locked the vehicle's identification number in its own systems, meaning no authorized Bugatti dealer anywhere in the world could sell replacement parts against that specific chassis, even to a buyer willing to pay full price. That distinction matters enormously, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. A manufacturer choosing not to perform a repair themselves is a business decision every car company makes constantly. Insurance write-offs happen, and factories are not obligated to personally rebuild every wreck that crosses their service network. A manufacturer actively preventing anyone else, anywhere, from purchasing the parts needed to attempt that repair independently is a different action entirely. Why lock a VIN on a car that has already been declared a total loss, rather than simply letting the free market decide whether an independent rebuild was worth attempting? Enter Matt Armstrong, a British mechanic who has built a career and a substantial YouTube audience, specifically around reviving wrecked and written-off supercars, Lamborghinis, BMWs, and now, increasingly, some of the rarest hypercars on the planet. Armstrong heard about the wrecked Pur Sport and flew to the car's location almost immediately. The car was purchased out of the salvage listing for a fraction of its original value, and Armstrong committed to a rebuild that Bugatti had, by that point, already made clear it wanted no part of. The car came down to bare components almost immediately after arrival. Interior stripped, powertrain separated from the chassis. Every panel that had taken damage laid out for assessment. What the team found once they got past the surface damage was worse than the initial estimate suggested. Torn transmission mounts, a coolant system that had failed in more places than expected, and a front structure that would need to be rebuilt, essentially from scratch. None of it came with a parts catalog. None of it came with technical support from the one company that actually knew how the car had been engineered. Every subsequent decision on this rebuild had to be made without the manufacturer's help, and that constraint is what shaped everything that followed. The wider context makes the VIN lock even harder to read as a routine decision. Bugatti is not a mass-market manufacturer moving thousands of units a year, where inventory control and parts allocation genuinely require tight systems. It builds a small number of extraordinarily expensive cars for a small number of owners, many of whom already maintain long, direct relationships with the factory. Locking a VIN on a car the company has already walked away from is not protecting an active customer relationship or an ongoing warranty obligation. The warranty ended the moment the car was declared a total loss. It is, functionally, a decision about who is and is not allowed to own a running Bugatti, made after the company itself had already decided the car was worthless. It is worth noting what this saga is not, too. Nobody involved has accused Bugatti of doing anything illegal at the time the decision was made. There was no right to repair law in force anywhere relevant to this transaction back in October of 2025, and manufacturers withholding parts from salvage-titled vehicles is a long-standing, broadly legal practice across the entire auto industry, exotic or otherwise. The controversy was never really about legality in the moment. It was about whether the practice felt fair, given the price tag involved and the public nature of the rebuild. And fairness, unlike legality, does not require a court to weigh in before people start forming an opinion. How they rebuilt a Bugatti. Without support from Bugatti, Armstrong's team had exactly one path forward: reverse engineer or source everything themselves, one component at a time. The coolant overflow pipe, when it needed replacing and no Bugatti part was available, ended up solved with a length of standard brake hose. A fix so simple it would look almost comedic on a car worth millions, if it did not also demonstrate exactly how little of a Bugatti's construction is exotic, unobtainium engineering at every single point. The airbag system, similarly, was sourced not from Bugatti at all, but from an entirely different manufacturer's parts bin, an Audi A3, a car that costs a fraction of a single wheel off the Chiron. The bigger engineering challenge sat at the heart of the car: a torn mounting bracket connecting the engine to the gearbox,
Purely to get this part out here. The broken gearbox and engine mounting.
needed to be replaced entirely. And with no factory part available, the team's solution was to three-dimensionally scan the damaged original, model a replacement digitally, and have it manufactured from that scan. That kind of fabrication would have been effectively impossible a decade earlier. It has become almost routine for high-end independent restoration work today, and it is precisely the kind of capability that undercuts a manufacturer's claim that a car like this can only be safely repaired inside their own factory. Bodywork presented its own separate obstacle. With Bugatti refusing to supply exterior panels as well as mechanical parts, the team turned to a specialist fabrication shop based in Dubai to build a custom wide-body kit for the car entirely from scratch. A kit that ultimately cost in the neighborhood of $700,000 on its own. Fitting components never designed for this exact car meant cutting and adapting existing carbon fiber sections, reshaping side skirts, and reworking the front end to accommodate a more aggressive silhouette than Bugatti's original design. None of it was simple. All of it got done anyway. Sourcing parts from unrelated manufacturers is not, in itself, an unusual practice in high-end independent restoration. It happens constantly, quietly, across the entire classic and exotic car world. Precisely because component sharing across a parent company's brands is far more common than most owners assume. What makes this instance notable is simply that it happened in public, on camera, week after week, in direct response to a manufacturer's refusal, rather than as a routine cost-saving choice. Every improvised fix became evidence, in an ongoing argument about whether Bugatti's refusal was about safety or about control, whether the team intended it that way or not. Viewers who have followed the project closely have pointed to one detail in particular as capturing the whole dynamic. The accelerator pedal on a car capable of speeds beyond 400 kilometers per hour is, mechanically, a molded piece of plastic, not the exotic billet component the car's price tag might suggest. It is a small thing. It is also a useful reminder that even inside a car engineered to this level, not every component justifies the mystique built around the brand as a whole. And that mystique is doing real work in the argument over whether independent repair should be possible at all. This was not, notably, Armstrong's first experience solving a Bugatti problem without Bugatti's help. Years earlier,
And that's what the machine at Bugatti is really used for.
working on his own Bugatti Veyron, Armstrong sourced a needed component, not from Bugatti's own parts network, but from a Volkswagen Lupo, a small, unglamorous economy hatchback that, because of Bugatti's historical ownership under the Volkswagen Group, happened to share a surprising number of underlying parts with a car costing several hundred times as much. That precedent matters here, because it undercuts the idea that Bugatti's exotic engineering makes independent repair categorically impossible. It suggests instead that some of what looks unrepairable from the outside is, at least in part, a matter of what the manufacturer chooses to make available, not what is technically achievable. By the time the Chiron's two separated halves were bolted back together and the engine turned over for the first time since the crash, months of improvised engineering had gone into a car Bugatti had already written off as a total loss. The rebuild is not finished, but it runs, and it runs on parts a factory refused to sell. Bugatti finally responds. Bugatti's side of this story deserves the same scrutiny as Armstrong's, and it starts with an unusual detail. The company's chief executive, Mate Rimac, did not stay silent on the controversy. He addressed it directly, in a response acknowledging that Bugatti leadership had been following the rebuild online. His central claim was straightforward, that much of what circulates online about Bugatti's service, repair, and maintenance pricing is exaggerated or simply inaccurate, and that the figures attached to this specific case had been misrepresented in some retellings. Rimac also extended what looked, on its surface, like an olive branch, an offer to have the car flown to Bugatti's factory in Molsheim, France,
Bugatti didn't do this from the factory because it would have cost a lot more to
where the company's own technicians could evaluate and potentially repair it properly. Read one way, that is a reasonable, safety-driven offer from a manufacturer that builds cars capable of speeds beyond 400 kilometers per hour and does not want its badge on a vehicle rebuilt outside factory quality control. Read another way, it is an offer that conveniently keeps every dollar of the repair, every part sold, and every hour of labor inside Bugatti's own revenue stream. An offer to solve the problem entirely, on Bugatti's terms, at Bugatti's price, with no independent alternative left standing. What the offer did not include is worth stating plainly. Bugatti did not offer to sell Armstrong or Gonzalez the parts needed for an independent rebuild, at any price. The choice presented was binary: send the car to France, or receive no manufacturer support whatsoever. Armstrong's own response to Rimac's video was notably measured rather than combative. He expressed surprise that Bugatti's leadership was engaging with the situation at this level in the first place, and made clear he was not interested in manufacturing a public feud with the company, only in finding a path to a working car that did not cost anywhere near the original factory quote. That framing matters for how the rest of this story reads. This was never presented by either side as a dispute over whether Bugatti had the right to refuse a factory repair on their own terms. It was, and remains, a dispute over whether refusing to sell replacement parts to an independent buyer is a legitimate safety decision or something closer to control over the secondary market for a car the company had already disowned. Bugatti's underlying safety argument is not without some technical basis either, and it would be dishonest to wave it away entirely. The Chiron platform is built around a carbon fiber monocoque, a quad-turbocharged 16-cylinder engine, and a chassis that, according to the company, sometimes requires being split into front and rear sections to properly access certain repairs. Work that demands specialized tooling most independent shops simply do not have. Whether that complexity justifies refusing to sell parts to anyone attempting the work anyway, rather than simply declining to warranty or certify an independent repair, is the question this entire saga keeps circling back to, without ever fully resolving. There is also a financial dimension to Bugatti's position worth naming plainly. A car company that sells replacement parts only through its own factory channel, at factory-set prices, for factory-performed labor, captures the entire value of every post-crash repair for cars still worth saving. A car company that also refuses to sell those same parts to an independent buyer working on a car it has already declared worthless captures nothing from that specific vehicle. But it does remove a rebuilt, independently repaired Bugatti from ever entering the used market as a functioning, drivable example built outside factory oversight. Whether that outcome is the actual motivation behind the part's refusal is unknowable from the outside. It is, at minimum, a business interest that happens to align neatly with the safety rationale Bugatti has offered publicly. It is also fair to note that Rimac did not have to respond at all. Plenty of manufacturers, faced with a viral controversy over a written-off car, would simply say nothing and let the story run its course, without ever putting a company executive on camera addressing it directly. Choosing to respond, even in a way that ultimately reaffirmed Bugatti's original position, suggests the company recognized the reputational stakes here went beyond one crashed car, and that recognition is, itself, a form of pressure the public conversation had already succeeded in applying, months before any law was due to take effect. The law behind the headlines. On July 31st of this year, a piece of European Union legislation, years in the making, finally became applicable law across all 27 member states. Formerly known as Directive 2024/1799 and commonly referred to as the Right to Repair Directive. The law was adopted back in June of 2024 and published in the EU's official journal the following month. Member states were given a 2-year runway to transpose its requirements into their own national laws. A runway that expired on the same date the directive itself became enforceable. What the directive actually requires is significant on its own terms. Manufacturers of covered products must repair them at a reasonable price and within a reasonable time, even after the original warranty period has expired. Consumers who choose repair over replacement receive an automatic 12-month extension to their legal guarantee. Manufacturers must publish indicative repair pricing publicly, and the law explicitly prohibits contractual terms, hardware designs, or software techniques whose purpose is to obstruct independent repair. On paper, this reads like precisely the kind of rule that would force a company like Bugatti to open its parts catalog to an independent rebuild. Here is where the story gets genuinely complicated, and where a great deal of the coverage around this case has gotten ahead of what the law actually says. The directive's obligations do not apply to every product sold in the European Union automatically. They apply specifically to products that already have repairability requirements established under separate EU law, primarily through the bloc's eco-design regulations. As of the directive's own confirmed scope, published directly by the European Commission, those covered categories are household and electronic goods, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, mobile phones, tablets, and similar consumer electronics. The mechanism exists for additional product categories to be added over time, through what the directive calls delegated acts. But automobiles, as of this law's effective date, are not confirmed within that list. Some widely circulated reporting on this exact case has stated plainly that the new law covers cars and will effectively force Bugatti's hand. That framing may turn out to be correct eventually, if automobiles are added to the covered list in a future delegated act, or if a separate EU vehicle regulation is read alongside this directive to produce the same practical result. But as of the date this directive became applicable, its own published scope does not name motor vehicles among the products manufacturers are obligated to service and supply parts for. That gap between the popular narrative and the confirmed legal text is not a minor technicality. It is the entire question this saga now hinges on. It helps to understand why the directive is structured this way in the first place. Rather than listing every possible product category directly inside the law itself, the directive's drafters tied its repair obligations to a separate, ongoing regulatory process, the EU's eco-design framework, which sets durability and repairability standards product category by product category, over time, as each sector's technical requirements are worked out. Phones and tablets went through that process. Washing machines and vacuum cleaners went through it. Passenger vehicles, as a category, have not yet gone through it under this specific directive, even though cars are subject to plenty of other EU regulations entirely separate from this one, including older rules requiring manufacturers to share certain technical repair information with independent garages for routine maintenance. None of the directive's 4 core provisions mentioned earlier, repair obligations, warranty extensions, published pricing, anti-obstruction rules, are automatically void for products outside the current list. They simply do not apply yet, to categories not yet added. That is a meaningfully different situation from a law that explicitly excludes vehicles by name, and it is also different from a law that already includes them. The distinction between not yet covered and permanently excluded gets flattened constantly in casual coverage of this story, and it is the single most important distinction for understanding what actually happens next. The legal reality behind the headlines. Even setting aside whether automobiles eventually get added to the directive's covered list, a second complication sits underneath this specific case, and it rarely makes it into the coverage at all: jurisdiction. Matt Armstrong is based in the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom left the European Union years ago, and EU directives, including this one, do not automatically apply to UK-based consumers, repairers, or transactions, regardless of where the manufacturer in question is headquartered. The UK has developed its own separate right-to-repair regulations in recent years, largely focused on electronics rather than vehicles, and there is no indication those rules would extend to a case like this one. Layer onto that the fact that the Chiron itself carries a United States salvage title, purchased at a Copart auction by a Miami-based content creator, and the picture becomes even less straightforward. 3 different legal jurisdictions: the country where the manufacturer is based, the country where the repairer operates, and the country where the vehicle itself is titled and, for much of this saga, physically located, are all potentially relevant, and none of them obviously hands this dispute to the new EU directive in the clean, decisive way a headline promising legal victory would suggest. None of this means the directive is irrelevant to the broader conversation happening around Bugatti, or around ultra-luxury manufacturers generally. Regulatory pressure and public attention tend to move together, and a company facing sustained scrutiny over parts access for one very public case may adjust its policies well before any court or regulator forces the issue directly. Public pressure has changed corporate behavior plenty of times, without a single lawsuit ever being filed. What can be said with confidence, based on everything covered here, is this. Bugatti made a choice to lock a VIN and withhold parts from a car it had already declared beyond saving. Matt Armstrong made a choice to rebuild it anyway, using every resource available to him except the one company that actually built the thing. And a new European law arrived at almost exactly the same moment, carrying real obligations for manufacturers. Obligations whose reach into a case exactly like this one remains, as of right now, an open and unresolved question, whatever the most shareable headline about it claims. There is a version of this story where the law arrives, automobiles get added to the covered list within a year or two, and Armstrong's case becomes the textbook example lawmakers point to when explaining why the expansion was necessary in the first place. There is another version where automobiles are never added at all, where this directive stays confined to household electronics indefinitely, and the entire Bugatti angle turns out to have been a media narrative built on a headline that outran the underlying text from the very beginning. Both versions are plausible right now. Neither one is confirmed. That is precisely why treating this as a settled legal victory, rather than an open question worth watching, misrepresents where things actually stand. For now, the practical reality has not changed for anyone in a position like Armstrong's. A manufacturer can still, today, decline to sell parts for a car it has written off, in most jurisdictions, without violating this specific directive. Because the directive, as written and as currently scoped, has not yet reached the product category this entire saga is built around. The law arriving on the same news cycle as the rebuild's most dramatic chapters made for a compelling coincidence. It did not, on its own, make for a resolved case. Bugatti chose to lock a VIN and walk away completely from a car it had already called worthless. Matt Armstrong chose to rebuild it anyway, without a single part supplied by the company that built it in the first place. A brand new European law arrived right in the middle of that fight, but whether it reaches a case exactly like this one is an open question, whatever the headline claims. The rebuild never needed a law to be remarkable. If this cleared up what the headlines got wrong, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe before the next one drops.